My name is Dorothy Richardson. I'm 73 years old. I spent 41 years as a hospital administrator in Atlanta, Georgia. I managed budgets. I read contracts. I understood what documents meant, what they committed people to, what they took away. The day my son presented me with a rental agreement for my own home, I was sitting in his office on a Wednesday afternoon. Kenneth had called and asked me to come by, said it was important. I thought it was about the grandchildren. Maybe something financial they needed help with. Maybe something normal. But nothing about this was normal. Kenneth was seated at his desk when I arrived. Very formal. He had papers in front of him. The kind of papers you don't hand someone casually. The kind that mean something has shifted. He said, "Mom, we need to talk about the living situation." I sat down. I waited. I've learned that waiting tells you more than asking. Kenneth slid a document across the desk. It was typed. Professional, official looking. He said, "We think it's time to formalize things. You living with us. We need to set boundaries." I picked up the document. I read the first line. It said, "Lesser, Kenneth Richardson, lessee, Dorothy Richardson." My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't change, but something inside me went very still. I read further. The property address, my address, my house, the house Thomas and I bought 48 years ago, the house I owned completely, the house with my name on the deed. The monthly rent was listed as $900. Utilities were my responsibility. Parking in the driveway was permitted. The food storage in the common kitchen was limited to one shelf. Quiet hours were 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Overnight guests required 48-hour notice. Every detail was considered. Every expectation was spelled out. Kenneth hadn't typed this quickly. This was planned. I kept reading. Page 2, page 3. At the bottom, there was a line for my signature, for the date. Kenneth was watching me. He said, "I know it seems formal, but Brenda thinks we need clear expectations. And honestly, the house needs to pay for itself." I set the papers down very carefully on his desk. I folded my hands in my lap. I said, "I see." That's all I said. Kenneth looked like he expected more, like he expected me to be upset, like he expected me to sign. I said, "I'll need to think about this." I stood up. I picked up both copies of the lease, so I put them in my purse. Kenneth said, "Mom, we should probably talk about this more." I said, "I'll call you." Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been told to pay for something you already owned? Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is already speaking to something you felt yourself, like and subscribe. 48 years ago, Thomas and I bought this house. I was 25 years old. He was 31. We had been married for 9 years. We had saved for 5 years to afford the down payment. Every penny counted. I worked as a file clerk at the hospital. Thomas worked construction. We didn't have much, but we had a plan. The house was modest then. Single story. Needs work. The kitchen was from the 1950s. The plumbing was questionable. But there was something about it. The way light came through the windows in the morning. The size of the backyard. The possibility of it. The first conversation Thomas and I had about it was in the car after we'd seen it. He said, "We could build something here, something that's ours, something that no one can take from us." I said, "Yes, we could." And we did. Over 48 years, we renovated. We added a second story. We updated the kitchen. We replaced the roof. We added the den where Thomas spent his final months. Every improvement had our hands on it. Every dollar was documented. I kept every receipt, every invoice, every proof of improvement. The hospital taught me that. Documentation is protection. Thomas died 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to the end. The final months he spent them in the den, the room we'd built together. I sat with him every day. Every single day. I held his hand, and I didn't tell him about the insurance or the bills or what came next. I just sat there, and I let him know that someone was with him. When he died, I stayed in the house. I didn't have to. I chose to. Kenneth moved in 6 months after the funeral. Just temporarily, he said. He and Brenda needed a place while they saved for a down payment on their own home. That was 8 years ago. For 8 years, I paid everything. The property taxes, the utilities, the maintenance, the repairs. When the roof needed fixing, I paid for it. $5,000. When the air conditioning broke, I paid for it. $3,000. When the kitchen needed updating, I paid for it. $8,000. But I also paid for Kenneth's car insurance sometimes. $80 a month. And his phone bill sometimes. $100 a month. And groceries. $200 a month. I never asked for anything in return. I never kept track. I never mentioned it. But my neighbor Vivian kept track. She's a retired CPA. She noticed when I stopped mentioning the help I was giving. One day, she said, "How much do you think you've put into supporting Kenneth and Brenda?" I didn't have a number. I had never added it up. She said, "I think you should know." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with checkbooks going back 8 years. I calculated. Property taxes, approximately $4,200 a year. 8 years. $33,600. Utilities, $250 a month average. $24,000 over 8 years. Car insurance for Kenneth, $800 a year for 4 years. $3,200. Phone plan, $100 a month for 3 years. $3,600. Groceries and household supplies, conservative estimate, $200 a month. $19,200. Emergency repairs, air conditioning, roof, plumbing, $8,000. Total, approximately $91,600 over 8 years. I looked at that number and I understood something. I had been financing Kenneth's life without calling it what it was. I had been a bank. Without interest, without terms, without acknowledgement. 3 years into Kenneth's temporary stay, Brenda started making decisions about the house. She redecorated the living room without asking me. She replaced curtains I had chosen. She removed photographs of Thomas and me from the walls, replacing them with family photos of Kenneth, Brenda, and the grandchildren. When I mentioned the photographs, Brenda said, "It's depressing. We wanted the house to feel more like ours." I said nothing, but I noticed. I noticed everything. 6 months later, Brenda wanted to rent out the den, the room where Thomas spent his final months, the room where he died. She wanted to rent it out to a short-term rental service for extra income. I said, "Absolutely not." Brenda seemed surprised by my firmness. She dropped it. But 3 months later, she brought it up again. "We really could use the extra income. Thomas isn't using that room anymore." I said no. Kenneth didn't intervene. His silence was agreement. 2 years ago, Kenneth started talking about the house, Not Mom's house, just the house, as if it was shared property that needed his management. He said to me, "The property taxes are going up. We need to think about selling or renting the upstairs." I said, "I own the house?" Kenneth said, "Yeah, but we live here too, so it's kind of all of ours." That was the moment I understood something had shifted in Kenneth's mind. He had moved from guest to co-owner in his own thinking. 6 months after that, Kenneth asked me to help him with his mortgage on his investment property, a rental he and Brenda had bought in another state. I said I couldn't help. Kenneth seemed hurt. He said, "I thought we helped each other." I didn't respond, but I remembered it. I filed it away with everything else I was observing. A year ago, the grandchildren went to college, both of them, expensive schools. Dot helped pay for both. No terms, no discussion. I just helped. I didn't ask Kenneth to contribute. I just paid. $30,000 total across 2 institutions. After I paid, Kenneth seemed to assume I would pay for everything else too. Room and board, books, supplies, travel home for holidays. I paid. Every request, every time. Last year, Kenneth mentioned that Brenda wanted to renovate the kitchen to increase the house's resale value. He seemed to assume this was a joint project, that I would pay for it. I said, "The kitchen doesn't need renovating." Kenneth said, "Mom, come on. It's 1980 style. It needs to be updated." I said, "It's fine." Kenneth dropped it. But Brenda brought it up 3 more times. Each time, I said no. I was keeping track of all of it. Every assumption, every request, every instance of Kenneth calling it the house, like it belonged to him. I was watching a pattern develop, and I was preparing for the moment when I would have to respond. 2 weeks before Kenneth called me to his office, Brenda started a conversation with him. The grandchildren had both graduated. They were out of the house. No more tuition for me to pay. Brenda said to Kenneth, "Your mom has been helping us for years. It's time for her to contribute more directly." Kenneth didn't understand. He said, "She's already helping. She paid for the kids' college." Brenda said, "Exactly. And she can help with the house, with living expenses. It's only fair." Kenneth said, "She owns the house." Brenda said, "Exactly. So she can pay to maintain it and pay to live in it. Everyone else does." The logic was circular, but it landed. Kenneth started researching what rental prices were in the area. He looked up comparable properties. He calculated what a fair market rent would be. He came up with $900 a month. It was about 15% of what comparable properties rented for. But it was a number. It was official sounding. It was something he could put on a document. He created the lease on his computer. He made it look professional. He made it look legal. He didn't ask my opinion. He didn't discuss it with me. He typed it up and set the meeting. The lease was his way of formalizing what Brenda had suggested. It was his way of saying, "You live here. You pay for it, like everyone else." But I didn't live in a rental. I lived in a house I owned, that I had paid for, that I had maintained for 48 years. Kenneth had gotten comfortable enough in his assumptions that he thought he could formalize them. He thought ownership could be reclassified as tenancy with a typed document. He thought he could transform his mother from owner to renter with official-looking language. He was about to discover that assumption is not the same as authority. At what point would you have moved out? Would you have stayed and confronted him? Or would you have left quietly like Dot did? Tell me in the comments. I didn't sign the lease. I didn't discuss it. I simply disappeared into my own thinking. I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, with checkbooks going back 8 years, with statements from my bank. I itemized everything I had paid for, everything I had financed without terms, property taxes, utilities, maintenance, repairs, groceries, phone bill, car insurance, grandchildren's education. I calculated the total again, $91,600. I documented how much Kenneth and Brenda had actually contributed to this house. Essentially, nothing. I called Vivian. I said, I need your help with something. She came over that evening. We sat at the kitchen table. I showed her everything, the calculations, the checkbooks, the proof. Vivian looked at the numbers and she said, He's trying to rent your house to you. I said, Yes. Vivian said, What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to move out. Vivian nodded like she expected this answer. I called an apartment complex 3 miles away. I inquired about a 1-bedroom unit. I went to see it. It was $950 a month, barely more than what Kenneth was asking me to pay for a house I owned. I decided to move. I gave notice at the apartment complex. I was approved. I could move in 10 days. I told no one. Not Kenneth, not Brenda, not even the grandchildren. I started moving things out of the house slowly, discreetly. The things that mattered. My photographs. My books. My grandmother's china. The things that made it mine. I opened a new bank account. Just in my name. No one else had access. I canceled Kenneth's car insurance. It was my policy. I removed his name. I canceled the phone plan that included Kenneth's line. I got my own plan. My own number. Different provider. I called the utility company and I changed the account holder from Thomas and Dorothy Richardson to Dorothy Richardson. Just me. I gave notice that the utilities would be transferred to the new tenant, Kenneth, in 3 weeks. Every action was methodical. Every action was documented. Every action was legal. I didn't leave a note. I didn't explain. I just prepared. 3 weeks passed. I had moved out most of my things. I kept it subtle. Kenneth and Brenda hadn't noticed much. They were living their lives, assuming I would stay, assuming I would accept the lease. The morning of the move, I woke up in the house for the last time. I made coffee. I sat in the kitchen. I looked at the space Thomas renovated, the countertop we chose together, the light that came through the window I picked. I finished the coffee. I set the cup in the sink. I took one photograph of Thomas from my nightstand. I took my jewelry. I took the things that were undeniably mine. I left the house keys on the kitchen counter. Just the keys, nothing else. No note, no explanation. I left at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. The moving truck arrived at 9:30. I had hired movers. They loaded the final boxes. By 10:30, I was gone. I didn't tell Kenneth I was moving. I didn't tell Brenda. I simply disappeared. Kenneth came home from work that evening. He found the house different, quieter. He called out, "Mom." No response. He looked in my bedroom. My things were gone. The bed was bare except for the mattress. He went to the kitchen. He saw the keys on the counter. He picked them up. His hands were steady, but something in his face changed. He understood what had happened. He called my phone number, the number that was part of the family plan, the number that no longer worked. And the call went unanswered. He texted me. No response. He drove to Vivian's house. Vivian answered the door but didn't invite him in. Kenneth said, "Do you know where my mom is?" Vivian said, "She moved out." Kenneth said, "Where?" Vivian said, "Somewhere that's not in a lease agreement." Kenneth went back to the house. He looked for evidence, a forwarding address, a new phone number, anything. He found nothing. He called multiple times. The calls went unanswered. Kenneth made 41 missed calls over the course of 10 days. Call 1. "Mom, where are you? Call me back." Call 2. "This isn't funny. Call me back immediately." Calls 3 through 10, increasingly desperate. "Mom, please. I don't know what's happening. Call me." By call 15, Kenneth was at the utility company office. He was learning that the accounts were being transferred. The bill would be his, $400 a month. Calls 20 through 25. Kenneth's voice was different now, not demanding, pleading. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't handle the lease right. Let's talk about it." By call 30, Kenneth had realized something else. The car insurance, the phone plan, the grocery money. Everything I had quietly been providing was gone. His expenses had increased by $1,200 a month. The utility bills, the car insurance, the phone plan, the property taxes, the household maintenance. All of it was suddenly his responsibility. Call 35. Kenneth sounded defeated. "Mom, please, call me back. We can figure this out. This isn't like you." Call 40. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please call me." Call 41. Kenneth didn't leave a message. He just called. And there was no answer. After call 41, Kenneth stopped calling. He sat in his car in the parking lot and he looked at the financial situation he had created. He calculated what he owed, what I had been covering. He understood that the lease agreement was the thing that made me leave, that the lease was the moment I decided this was over. He called Brenda and said, "We made a really big mistake." Brenda didn't understand at first. But when the bills started arriving, utilities, property taxes, maintenance, she understood. They hired a lawyer. The lawyer told them, "She owns the house. She's allowed to leave. She's allowed to stop paying for it. You can't make her come back." Kenneth realized there was no legal recourse. I was gone. I was not required to pay anything. I was not required to speak to him. I was not required to maintain any financial support. He tried to find me through Vivian. Vivian refused to help. He tried to find my phone number through the phone company. The company wouldn't give it to him. He drove to the apartment complex where Vivian said I might be. He drove slowly through the parking lot. He looked for my car. He didn't find it. Kenneth was left sitting in a house that was suddenly more expensive than he anticipated. A house with bills he didn't know existed. A house with expenses he had been ignoring because I was paying them, and I was not coming back. My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that looks out at the parking lot, a bathroom that's clean and new. It's $950 a month. I pay it with my own money, from my own account. Money I earned over 41 years of work. I have no roommates. I have no one to answer to. I have no one claiming ownership of my space. I have furniture that's mine, books that are mine, photographs of Thomas that I placed where I wanted them. On the first Saturday morning in the apartment, I made coffee. I sat in the small kitchen. I looked out at the parking lot, and it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. Vivian visits once a week. We sit in the living room with tea and we talk. She said, "Do you regret it?" I said, "Regretting moving out? No. Regretting the years I paid for his life without naming it? Yes. But I can't change that." Vivian said, "He's been calling everyone trying to find you." I said, "I know." Vivian said, "Do you plan to answer?" I said, "When he's ready to listen instead of demand. Maybe." Kenneth didn't call after the 41st call. He stopped trying. But 6 months later, he sent a letter. A real letter. In an envelope. Handwritten. I opened it. Kenneth was apologizing. Really apologizing. Not the "I'm sorry you left" kind. The "I was wrong and I see it now" kind. He wrote, "I treated you like a tenant in your own home. I treated your support like an entitlement. I didn't see what you were doing until it was gone. I'm sorry." I read it twice. I sat with it. I didn't respond immediately. 3 weeks later, I called him. Not a text. An actual phone call. Kenneth answered, and I could hear the hope in his voice. And the fear. I said, "I got your letter." Kenneth said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." I said, "I know you are." There was silence. Then Kenneth said, "Can you come back?" I said, "No. But maybe we can have dinner sometime." Kenneth said, "Okay, thank you." I said, "You're welcome." I hung up. I sat in my apartment. I looked at the space that was completely mine. The apartment is small, but it's honest. It's transparent about what it is. It's not disguised as something else. It's not a lease agreement claiming to be a family home. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Kenneth in days. Not out of anger, out of peace. I have my life back. My money is mine. My home is mine. My support is something I choose, not something I'm expected to give. Some things are yours. You understand that. They're yours. And you protect them, not by screaming about ownership, by simply walking away when someone tries to claim what was never theirs to take. If you've ever had to remove yourself from a situation to make the point, leave a comment. Tell me your story. And if this one stayed with you, there's another one waiting in the description. A story about a woman who watched her life savings disappear before she said one word.